We've all grown up hearing about, and probably experiencing, some part of the cataclysmic events that have shaped the course of human history. The Black Plague, the Spanish flu, two successive world wars, even the world financial crisis of 2007-2008. You probably know where this is going, but when put in the context of some of history's darkest phases, it does feel like COVID-19 merits a serious mention. The intention, of course, is not to compare natural or man-made disasters, all of which take an excruciating toll on human life, but to contextualize the gravity of what we are all collectively living through. Calling it a crisis even may just be an understatement. The economic toll of this pandemic has been devastating, upending several industries, jobs, and livelihoods. And the media has been no exception. The novel dichotomy of having captive audiences at home, consuming vast amounts of content, while at the same time dealing with the problems of content generation and declining ad revenue, has thrown up a thorny dilemma that all media companies nationally have had to grapple with. And yet, with all of these disasters playing out on a global scale, with all the upheaval that has shaken us to our foundations, there is also the unlikely story of opportunity, which I'd like to tell you a little bit about through the prism of our just over 2-year-old startup, Asiaville. Empowering the next billion internet users that are coming online in India with local language, infotainment, and education content. Sounds like a lofty goal, but we really do think it's one worth addressing head on. How did we come upon this immodest goal? Well, here's a bit on me for further context. I graduated in 2005 from NYU, went on to work the corporate life for about 8 years, first with the BBC in New York, and then with Disney in India, always with a focus on the digital media sector. I was lucky, I think, to have a good vantage point from which to view how the industry was evolving. From its early days when advertising was just about becoming viable, to the explosion of revenue models ranging from programmatic to affiliate to subscription and frankly, everything in between. And of course, a zillion content providers popping up to fulfill the unquenchable collective thirst of large parts of the world moving online. Access to the internet remains uneven, depending on which country one is looking at. However, more people globally have access to information and knowledge through the internet than ever before. And that, on balance, is a good thing. Yet one point that always kind of stood out to me, honing in on the Indian context now in particular, is the huge asymmetry in how the economics of online content consumption has been evolving. Through my role with Culture Machine, the startup I joined after my Disney stint, I got a ringside view of how the digital media landscape was actually shaping up in India. And what we witnessed there was quite astounding. While advertisers were still largely favoring the English language as far as where brand monies were being spent, the real boom in viewership, engagement, and pretty much any metric you could think of was unquestionably coming from local language publishers and content creators. This realization led us to launch 2 successful digital media brands in the South back then, but there was more to be done in this space. Take a look at these graphs from a pivotal KPMG Google study that was done a few years back. The underlying trends are likely to be even more pronounced now. What this reveals is that English language internet users were projected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 3%, as against a projected compound annual growth rate of 18% for vernacular language users. It also projected that 90% of internet users over the next 5 years would be vernacular language users. In other words, 9 out of 10 new internet users are likely to be vernacular first. A more recent study by IAMAI and Kantar, put out last year, estimated that internet usage in rural India is growing 3 times faster than internet usage in urban India. 13% for rural India, as opposed to just 4% for urban India in the last year alone. The overall internet population in India is now racing towards 700 million, but the internet penetration still stands at only about 45%. What does this tell us? The remaining percentage of the population likely to come online in this decade is sure to snowball this trend of vernacular first content consumption. So it's clear that in a country that speaks 22 languages officially, with way over 1,600 dialects, we are only at the tip of the iceberg. With plummeting data costs and increasing bandwidths, the much talked about next billion, factoring in population growth as well, will be coming online from non-metropolitan areas, or what are more conventionally called Tier 2, 3, 4 cities. And it's almost certain that the vast majority of them would be vernacular language first internet users. At our startup, we have seen these trends play out pretty dramatically over the past 2+ years. The sheer depth of audiences consuming content in Tamil, Malayalam, and Hindi, the 3 languages we currently serve with original content in video, audio, and text formats, has been increasing exponentially year on year. And through the peak of the first wave of COVID last year, we began to notice something pretty incredible. A surge in viewers thirsty for factual, verifiable information on this deadly, and at that time still relatively unknown virus. From explainers breaking down the different mutations of the virus, to articles providing clear guidelines on how to respond to them, to podcast profiles of courageous COVID warriors that continue to battle on the front lines, we saw viewers, readers, and listeners engaging with our content in their local language like never before. What's more, we saw a huge surge in community-based activity. People forming Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram groups, sharing resources and up-to-the-minute verifiable information. While the unavoidable strand of WhatsApp university messages continued unabated to spread tomes of fake news and misinformation, we also saw a huge amount of interest in the facts, which quickly became, and of course continues to be, the need of the times. And thus, from the bowels of the worst pandemic we've seen in our lifetime, emerged an opportunity. It was like an entire invisible army was rising up against the virus online through a disparate but strong and widespread community of local language users, fighting it back with the strongest tool in their combined arsenal: knowledge. This kind of a coordinated effort would not have been possible in the internet era of, say, the early 2000s, where English remained the lingua franca online and access remained restricted to metropolitan cities. COVID-19 has decimated communities and uprooted lives, but it has also bonded people together in a way no disaster has done previously, owing largely to the democratization of the internet across multiple languages, economic, and social strata. The worst health crisis that we have lived through gave rise to an opportunity for us to unite and connect in meaningful ways. Would this have happened organically? Worth a thought, isn't it? We seized this opportunity to double down on our information and knowledge-based approach and started bringing content to our largely millennial audiences in a range of entertaining and exciting formats. The crisis allowed us to rethink our strategy and hone in on the theme of empowerment, which today is our central driving force. Providing context and the tools necessary to thrive in a world which is rife with misinformation and scarce resource availability, particularly in the vernacular language milieu, is a problem that needs to be addressed urgently, and one that we've taken on. We find ourselves at an opportune time in history to address this challenge as we continue to find ways to emerge from the COVID storm and build a strong foundation for times to come. The dissemination of knowledge and information carried through the veins of exploding wireless and broadband networks is not a secular trend across all spheres of activity. Take education, for instance. While we've borne witness to the exciting surge in the edtech sector owing to the boom in online learning during these times, what one doesn't hear about as much is the vast majority of students that are left out of this education revolution. One salient feature of the education sector overall has been the major disparity between the number of CBSE and ICSE schools on the one hand and the number of state board schools, which are largely government-run, on the other. While the state board schools outnumber their national board counterparts several times over, we still find a majority of e-learning platforms focused more on the national boards. There seems to be a large gap in the quality of online education for state board schools and government-run schools nationally. According to UNICEF, over 25 crore Indian children have been negatively impacted by the closure of schools through this COVID period. At the height of the first COVID wave last year, we saw an opportunity to drive impact at scale, fitting within our overall theme of empowerment. Our core focus remains on the local language milieu, geared primarily towards curricular learning and imparting local language vocational skills to students of all ages. At a time when schools remain closed owing to the pandemic, the need for quality education delivered online has never been felt more acutely. There remain, of course, significant challenges in access to the internet, which hamper the full potential of online learning from being realized. However, we've embarked on our journey to try and solve this problem at a ground level, starting in the state of Kerala. And the results so far have been nothing but encouraging. The new education policy places emphasis on learning and skill development in local languages. These are clearly areas that need to be addressed with some urgency. The acceleration of online learning in the wake of the current crisis has, in a sense, served to exacerbate the dire need for the benefits of this learning to be distributed evenly across all social, regional, and linguistic cohorts. This may not have been as apparent in the normal course of events, but COVID has thrown a spotlight on this glaring divide, and with that comes an opportunity. So there it is. Asiaville was born a little over 2 years ago. A global pandemic of epic proportions came upon us over a year ago, and we adapted. What's more, we found opportunities. Empowering the next generation of internet users in the vernacular languages through infotainment and education became our North Star. And we are trudging on towards it, battling all the headwinds that startups inevitably face, particularly so at these times. The idea of an invisible army is a captivating one. Not the troll army that anonymity on the internet breeds, but an invisible army that coalesces around the core pillars of education, knowledge, and empowerment. And in humanity's darkest hour, becomes an unmitigated force for positive change. This is what we have witnessed through the course of this pandemic. A crisis of such epic proportions wreaks havoc on a scale that is hard to comprehend. But it also does something else along with that. It throws up a mirror and allows us to introspect on systems that are inherently flawed or that have come undone over time. And therein lie potential opportunities. My intention with this talk is not in any way to be reductionist about the link between crisis and opportunity. There are formidable challenges involved with any opportunity, and the ones that I've outlined here in particular, at times like these, are anything but straightforward. But defining them clearly help us to set a North Star that we can all collectively strive towards. And ultimately, that's perhaps what one needs to get through the crisis as well. That brings me to the obligatory famous person quote. Winston Churchill once said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." While the ongoing pandemic has been devastating in its impact across the globe, and no part of it can be characterized as good, it has taught me something quite fundamental. A crisis can breed opportunity, and sometimes it must. Thank you.